1942, Eastern Front. A German soldier carefully frames a photograph. In the image, an SS soldier aiming his rifle. His target, a woman desperately trying to shield a child with her body. The soldier takes the photo, develops it, and then mails it home to his family, like a vacation postcard. The Polish resistance intercepts it, and today, that photograph, known as the Evenhorod Einsatzgruppen photograph, sits in archives as evidence. Evidence of what, exactly? That German soldiers not only witnessed the Holocaust, they documented it, photographed it, sent it home to their loved ones. So here's the question that haunts World War II history. Did regular Wehrmacht soldiers know what Hitler had them fighting for? Did they understand the genocide was happening? After the war, they all said no. We didn't know. We were just following orders. The camps were secret. But in 2001, a German historian discovered something buried in British archives. Thousands of pages of transcripts. Secret recordings of German prisoners of war. Just chatting, thinking no one was listening. And what they said in their own words when they thought it was private will disturb you. Because they knew. They knew everything. They photographed it. They talked about it openly, and most of them thought it was perfectly fine. How do we know this? And what exactly did they say when they thought no one was listening? Quick note. This video examines documented historical evidence about Wehrmacht soldiers' knowledge of Nazi atrocities. We present facts to understand how ordinary people become complicit in genocide. This honors victims by ensuring we never forget what happened and how it happened. Let's start with what everyone believed for decades. After World War II ended, a narrative took hold. The clean Wehrmacht myth. It went like this. The SS committed the atrocities, the genocide, the concentration camps, the mass shootings that was all SS. The regular German army? Just soldiers, fighting a war. They didn't know about the Holocaust. This became gospel. Even at Nuremberg, Wehrmacht officers claimed ignorance. We fought on the front. We didn't know what was happening behind the lines. The camps were secret. How could we know? We were just doing our duty. And for decades, people wanted to believe this because the alternative was too disturbing. If millions of regular soldiers knew about genocide and participated anyway, what does that say about humanity? About how ordinary people enable atrocities? But in 2001, that myth was about to be shattered by a German historian who stumbled upon something the British had kept secret for 56 years. And what he found would change how we understand the Holocaust forever. Sönke Neitzel, German historian, Glasgow University, doing research at the British National Archives in Kew, London. He's looking for something routine, military documents, standard stuff, and then he finds transcripts, conversations between German prisoners of war from World War II. At first, he thinks it's a small collection, maybe a few dozen pages, but as he keeps digging, he realizes what he's actually found. Over 100,000 transcripts from 3 secret British facilities: Trent Park in North London, Latimer House, and Wilton Park. The British had systematically bugged these POW camps. Microphones hidden in lampshades, in plant pots, in billiards tables, even in trees in the garden. Over 10,000 German prisoners passed through these facilities, nearly 60 German generals at Trent Park alone, and the British recorded everything they said. Now here's the brilliant part. The Germans had no idea. They thought they were just chatting with fellow soldiers in private. so they spoke freely about what they'd done, what they'd seen, what they thought about it, and who were the secret listeners. Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi Germany. They transcribed every word. Winston Churchill personally read these transcripts. He called them an excellent insight into the German character. But after the war, the British classified everything, kept it secret for decades, until Neitzel found it in 2001. He spent years analyzing the transcripts, published 2 books, Tapping Hitler's Generals and Soldaten, on fighting, killing, and dying. And what emerged from these conversations, in the soldiers' own words, destroyed the clean Wehrmacht myth completely. But what exactly did they say? And how casual were they about atrocities? Picture this. German generals. Comfortable prison. They're allowed to keep personal servants. They drink wine, eat good food. One general literally wrote home saying the British were so stupid for treating them so well. And while sipping wine in this luxury POW camp, what do they talk about? War crimes. Lots and lots of war crimes. A review of Neitzel's work describes what emerged. German soldiers were brutal and licentious, as cruel as they were casual in inflicting horrific violence on combatants and civilians alike. They talked about the mass gassing of Jews and gang rapes to individual killings. One soldier bragged about a Dane shot dead over a trivial quarrel on a tram. Another, a Frenchman gunned down because the killer needed his bicycle. A soldier proudly described wearing chamois gloves specifically to knock down a dirty Polish swine. They recounted these incidents the way you or I might describe our morning commute. And when a few soldiers protested that such crimes weren't the actions of honorable soldiers, they were, quote, a distinct minority. Most soldiers didn't object, they participated, or they didn't care. But here's what's really disturbing. They didn't just talk about atrocities in vague terms. They talked about specific massacres, with numbers, with details, with pride. One of the largest, Babi Yar, September 1941. And what happened there reveals exactly how much the Wehrmacht knew and how involved they were. September 29th and 30th, 1941. Just outside Kiev, 33,771 Jews murdered in 2 days. Now, the post-war narrative was that the SS did this. The Wehrmacht just happened to be nearby. They didn't know. They weren't involved. But here's what actually happened. Wehrmacht propaganda units printed the notices. The ones ordering Jews to report for resettlement. They posted them around Kiev. Wehrmacht officers coordinated with the SS on logistics, provided support, helped organize the roundup. The German military commander helped arrange the entire operation after explosions in Kyiv. And after the massacre, a detailed report was written, documenting the murder of 33,771 people. How many copies of this report were made? At least 40. 40 copies distributed throughout Wehrmacht offices, SS offices, Nazi party offices. This wasn't secret. This was bureaucratic routine. These reports were, quote, routinely copied, read, and discussed in detail. The mass shootings of 1941 were widely known in Nazi government and party circles. It was like a company memo, except the subject line was successfully murdered 33,571 Jews. But wait, it gets worse. Because in September 1941, the Wehrmacht didn't just participate in massacres, they organized a training conference on how to commit them more efficiently. And what happened at that conference is one of the most disturbing things you'll hear. September 1941. Mogilev, Belarus. The Wehrmacht organizes a joint SS Police Wehrmacht training seminar. The topic? How best to murder partisans. Partisans being code for Jews. This was an official military training event, with officers from multiple branches taking notes, asking questions, and at the end of the conference, they held a live demonstration. 32 Jews were executed in front of assembled officers as a training exercise. This was officially recorded in military diaries as being conducted under real-life conditions. Let me repeat that. The Wehrmacht organized a corporate training seminar on genocide with a live demonstration, like they were teaching people how to use Excel, except the product was mass murder. And this wasn't hidden. This wasn't some rogue operation. This was official, documented, part of the military record. So when people say regular soldiers didn't know, what they're really saying is, we want to believe they didn't know because the evidence says otherwise. But how did ordinary people, soldiers with families who probably loved their kids, how did they become capable of this? Here's the uncomfortable truth. This didn't require monsters. It required a system that could turn ordinary humans into killers. And that system had 4 key components. First, indoctrination from childhood. By 1942, many Wehrmacht soldiers had grown up entirely under Nazi rule. They'd been in Hitler Youth, which had 8 million members by 1940. Membership became mandatory in 1936, reinforced in 1939. And it wasn't just Hitler Youth. 97% of public school teachers joined the Nazi Teachers League by 1936. Teachers joined the Nazi Party in greater numbers than any other profession. So these soldiers spent their childhoods being taught that Jews and Slavs were subhuman threats by everyone around them. Second, dehumanization through language and behavior. Wehrmacht soldiers used frozen corpses of Soviet soldiers as traffic direction markers, called them the silent police. They'd joke about whether the corpses were cold while driving past. When you can laugh at corpses you're using as road signs, shooting living people becomes easier. Third, authority and conformity. After the war, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran experiments. 65% of people delivered what they thought were maximum electric shocks to strangers just because an authority figure told them to. Every participant went up to 300 volts. If ordinary people in a psychology lab will hurt strangers on command, imagine the pressure in a military unit where everyone's doing it and refusing could get you shot. Except, and this is crucial, we'll come back to whether refusing actually got you shot, because that's where the story gets interesting. Fourth, encouragement from leadership. Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau issued the Severity Order in October 1941. It stated, "The soldier must learn fully to appreciate the necessity for the severe but just retribution that must be meted out to the subhuman species of Jewry." Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt read this and expressed complete agreement, urged his generals to release their own versions. General Erich von Manstein actually complained to an Einsatzgruppe that it was unfair the SS kept all the murdered Jews' wristwatches instead of sharing with the army. He didn't complain about the murders, he complained about the lack of loot sharing. This came from the top. These weren't rogue soldiers. This was official policy. But here's the question everyone asks. What if a soldier refused? What if someone said, "No, I won't shoot civilians"? This is where the just following orders defense falls apart completely. After the war, defense attorneys looked hard for evidence. They wanted to prove soldiers had no choice, that refusing orders meant execution. So they searched for decades, looking for any example of a German soldier executed for refusing to kill civilians or Jews. They found nothing, not one case. Between 130,000 and 150,000 German soldiers were convicted of desertion or absence without leave during World War II. In 1944 alone, about 200,000 cases of desertion were counted. So soldiers were willing to desert, risk court-martial, leave their units, but refuse to shoot civilians? Historians have found no examples of execution for this. Soldiers who refused were just reassigned, given different duties, moved to other units. The choice existed. This was established at Nuremberg. The tribunal ruled that just following orders wasn't a valid defense, though it acknowledged orders don't relieve responsibility provided a moral choice was in fact possible. And the evidence shows the choice was possible. Difficult, socially costly, career-ending, but possible. Most soldiers didn't take it, not because they'd be shot, but because everyone around them was participating, because their commanders encouraged it, because years of indoctrination had convinced them it was necessary, and because based on the recordings, many of them thought it was right. Now, you might still be thinking, maybe they did it reluctantly, out of pressure, but they didn't want to. Let me introduce you to the photographs. German soldiers routinely photographed the atrocities they participated in, and then sent the photos home to their families. British historian Hugh Trevor Roper noted this widespread photography suggested widespread approval of the massacres. The Evenhorod Einsatzgruppen photograph, the one I mentioned at the start, was intercepted by Polish resistance after a soldier tried to mail it home. Another photo from 1941 shows an execution at Berdychiv. It was found in a Wehrmacht soldier's personal diary with the notation, late July 1941, execution by the SS. He kept it, like a souvenir. These weren't photographs taken as evidence of crimes. They were vacation photos, keepsakes. Look what I did today. You don't photograph something you're ashamed of and mail it to your mother. You photograph it because you think it's worth documenting, worth sharing, maybe even worth being proud of. And that tells us everything about how they viewed what they were doing. Okay, deep breath, nuance time. Because it's true. Not every German soldier was a Nazi. Not every soldier participated in atrocities. Some actively resisted. The recordings show that a small minority did protest. They said, "This isn't honorable." They refused when they could. Some Wehrmacht soldiers were conscripted against their will. They didn't choose to be there. And it's absolutely true that Wehrmacht and SS were different organizations with different levels of involvement. Some soldiers did shoot into the air instead of at people. Some helped civilians escape when possible. Some tried to sabotage orders. These people existed. They proved moral courage was possible even in impossible circumstances. But, and this is the critical but, they were, in Neitzel's words, a distinct minority. The majority either participated actively or were passively complicit. They knew. They watched. They didn't object. And even if we acknowledge that drafted soldiers faced impossible choices, we can still hold them accountable for the choices they made. As one commenter, Eva Ferrero, an Austrian whose father served in the Wehrmacht, pointed out, "Being forced into a terrible situation doesn't eliminate moral responsibility for your actions within that situation. You can have sympathy for someone's circumstances while still acknowledging what they did. Just following orders is an explanation. It's not an excuse. So why does this matter 80 years later? Because this isn't about Nazis. It's about us." The question, how many soldiers knew, is really asking, how do normal people become complicit in evil? What are the warning signs? How do we prevent it? And the answer is clear. Most of them knew. Most participated or tolerated it. Most justified it. They told themselves they were following orders, protecting their country, eliminating threats, doing their duty. Every genocide uses the same justifications. Every authoritarian regime uses the same playbook. Dehumanize the target, create us versus them, claim existential threat, demand loyalty, punish dissent, escalate gradually, and ordinary people, people who think of themselves as good, become killers. That's the lesson. Not Germans were uniquely evil, but humans are capable of evil under the right conditions. Those conditions can be created deliberately, systematically, which means we all have responsibility to recognize warning signs, resist dehumanizing language, question authority, stand up even when it's hard. The minority who protested proved it was possible. Dangerous, sometimes fatal, but possible. And if we ever face that test, we need to be them. Here's the final twist. Even after all this evidence emerged, the myth persisted. In 1995, an exhibition in Hamburg showed 1,380 photographs of Wehrmacht troops committing war crimes. It sparked massive controversy, protests, debates. People didn't want to believe it. Field Marshal Rommel, whose mission included plans to exterminate Jews in North Africa and Palestine, still has Germany's largest military base named after him. The myth was so powerful, so psychologically necessary, that even confronted with photographic evidence, many people resisted. Because accepting the truth means accepting that your grandfather, your great-uncle, the good soldier in your family photo album might have known, might have participated, might have been complicit. That's hard. I get it. But historical truth doesn't care about our comfort. So, how many Nazi soldiers actually knew what Hitler had them fighting for? The evidence, the secret recordings, the photographs, the bureaucratic reports distributed in 40 copies, the training seminars with live demonstrations tells us most of them. They knew about the Holocaust. They knew about mass shootings. They knew about extermination camps. They photographed it, mailed photos home, talked about it openly in what they thought were private conversations. Some participated eagerly, some watched passively. A small minority protested, but the claim that regular soldiers didn't know, that they were innocent bystanders, the evidence doesn't support it. Sönke Neitzel's discovery of those British recordings gave us something unprecedented. The unfiltered voices of Wehrmacht soldiers when they thought no one was listening. And what they said reveals the truth about complicity, about ordinary people enabling genocide, about how just following orders is never an excuse. We remember this not to condemn Germans specifically, but to understand how atrocity happens, because it doesn't require monsters, just ordinary people who convince themselves that evil is acceptable. And that means any of us could be them, or could be the minority who refused. The choice is always ours. The Wehrmacht wasn't ignorant. They were complicit. The evidence is overwhelming. What other historical myths need to be challenged? let me know. Subscribe to the Dictator Lab for more uncomfortable truths backed by actual evidence.